Fall is a great time to be thinking about adding trees into a garden. And it's a great time to plant them and get them rooted before summer hits because there's always a little bit more stress during the summer heat. I can't choose a tree for every site, but I can give you the questions to ask yourself to help get you closer to making the best decision for your space, both aesthetically and horticulturally.
Welcome to the Relish Gardens podcast, where we have conversations about the intersection between the garden and your life and how all those things are intertwined, how to care for your space, how to prune, basically everything that is related to the design and development of a garden and the keeping of a garden.
I'm Claire Liddell Hannon. I'm the founder and lead designer at Relish Gardens, where we build, design, and maintain beautiful gardens. Let's dig in.
There's only so much room that you have to make choices about trees. What we see often is that a lot of people, because they don't know how many options there are out there, they default to the same 5 or 10 trees. There's the ones that we see because they're cheap and they're quick growing. We see a lot of Bradford pears in some parts of the country. They're actually invasive and you're not supposed to plant them, but we still see them a lot. They have really great little white flowers, but the white flowers smell like fish in the spring. If you have enough of them, you just have a whole street that stinks, and they don't last very long. Usually they end up diseased and they have to be taken down. We see a lot of maples. I mean, they're great. They're great trees. They grow here, but you can have a different one than the neighbor has because there's so many different options out there. It's funny because one of the things that I used to see a lot when I lived in LA was the crepe myrtle, Lagerstroemias. I had one in my front yard, and because I saw it everywhere, I was bored by it. And then I came up here, saw the same exact tree, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this tree? It's so beautiful. The bark is so great. It turns out the context really matters about where you put a plant. And Lagerstroemias or crepe myrtles, they're great plants. They are ubiquitous in LA in a way that we just don't see them up here. And up here, it's kind of a surprise. The reason why developers come in and they plant fast-growing trees next to the sides of the houses is because they're trying to anchor the home in the landscape. Trees do that. And so choosing a tree that long-term will anchor it and soften the edges, depending on how you place it and the tree that you choose, it can really soften the edges and make it inviting and welcoming. So using trees to kind of balance the architecture that's already on a site can be really beneficial. If you have something that's very linear and very hard, you can choose plants that will kind of accentuate that. Probably my approach would be soften it through the use of trees that have more of a flow and more movement to the branching structure or the leaf structure that kind of creates a softening of the space. One of the things that we hear often is, I want privacy. So automatically you think privacy equals a green hedge, or they'll just plant a bunch of stuff close together. I mean, it does the trick, but it's certainly not as interesting. And so one of the things that I'll do is I'll hold up my hand where I'm thinking about putting in the tree, and I'll kind of move back and forth, and it'll give me an idea of how big I need that tree to be and what kind of view blocking, because often you don't need an entire hedge. You just need a correctly positioned plant or tree, and often one conical tree, depending on how close or far away it is, that'll provide a lot of privacy. I can't really give specific advice for a specific tree because context matters. Individual preferences matter. But what I can help with is how I break down thinking about how I'm going to choose a plant for a certain site. Thinking about the context of the space. So what's your zone? What is the site like? Is it already a shaded spot? Is your site dry and hot or wet? Is it clay tolerant? If you have clay, does it work in sandy soils if that's what you're dealing with? Is it acidic or alkaline? These things all kind of matter to the health of the tree that you're putting in. Trying to get as closely as you possibly can to the needs of the tree is really beneficial. So it's really important to acknowledge the conditions of a site. One of the spaces that the people are often looking to add trees to is the spaces right next to the street. Often those areas are dry, and sometimes it's hard to get water out there. There's sidewalks sometimes flanking either side. So like really like thinking about how the sidewalk is going to affect the root growth and the development of this tree is like going to limit the choices that you have for that space. But I think limitations, if you take the time to think it through, they kind of create possibility. And by limiting the choices, you can figure out how you can maximize that decision. The least expensive development of a garden is always going to be to identify what the site conditions are and then work within them. We have a garden and there's these two Lagstromias and they're kind of flanking this space. And so you really need to have two trees that are kind of doing the same thing. And it's Stromia, so it needs like hot, dry conditions in order to thrive. And so one of the trees was thriving and the other one was really struggling. And so we found that there was, just a ton of water pooling in there. We basically had to figure out how to disperse the water somewhere else so that we could create the space that maintain the intentionality of the design. But if you know what the site conditions are ahead of time, you can make a choice for the garden that is going to both benefit the garden and be long-term less costly. Number one, always think of the site, right? Always think of like the site conditions. Then think about how big can this particular tree get? If it's going to grow to full form, how wide can it get? And what does that actually look like? It can be really helpful just putting a measuring tape on the ground that says 15 feet or 20 feet. 20-foot canopy is a very large canopy, and people put them in their garden all the time only to have to rip them out. You'll see the trees that the limbs have just been completely chopped, and often it's just because somebody put a bigger tree in that space thing that can handle the size of that tree. And so ideally, we're wanting to choose plants that are going to enhance the space and then also not take a large amount of investment time-wise to look beautiful, and that aren't going to have to kind of be mutilated in order to be functional. Picking a tree that works for your space and then works for the site that you're in, that is a good long-term investment in the landscape. They're impactful not just to your home, but your neighbors. Taking the time to pull back and make a good decision about the tree that you're going to put in is a wise investment of time and resources. It's important to think down the line of what the consequences of that choice are going to be in 10, 20 years. And some trees, they really don't show their full kind of interest until they are 20 years old. Some cases, you're planting a plant that really somebody else is going to enjoy. A Protea persica, it's really one of my favorite trees because it kind of gives year-round interest. It's beautifully, well, there's a few different shapes that you can get them in, but they're beautifully structured trees. In the winter, they have a really nice branching system and interest. But as it gets older, it develops this amazing bark and this spotted trunk. The older it gets, the more fantastic it gets. But putting one in your yard you're not necessarily going to get the benefits of that particular tree. And it might be the people who come after you that really get to enjoy it to its fullest extent. There's a really great example of a Protea persica over at the Blodell, which is a public garden, totally worth going to. It's a very, very old tree and it is magnificent. The modeling on the bark is just amazing. So picking a tree that is going to provide interest, I think, is important. And then thinking about a tree that is going to be beneficial for the people that come after you. I know I'm not the only one who's bought a house partially based on the plants that were in the house. I have to say that it was on the plus side. In my backyard, there was an old Japanese umbrella pine. Usually you see them and they're newer to the landscape and they're slow growing, so they take a long time to get established. But I'm benefiting from the choice that the gardeners before me made to put this particular plant in my garden. And probably getting towards 25, 30 feet tall, which is huge for a Cyadopetus. You just don't really see them in the landscape that big. One of the things I like to look at is the borrowed view from the landscapes that are around the garden. Sometimes in the vistas, you'll see different colors of different trees. And let's say red, for example. And then you bring a red tree with a red leaf in, and it just kind of a rounded shape. It kind of tricks the eye into thinking that the landscape beyond is still part of your space. I was visiting a home the other day, and the evergreen trees, they're large Doug firs, a grove of them. The way that they were set, the trunks of the tree almost framed the forest beyond because of where the placement was. You got this peekaboo look into the forest that just kept going. They framed this burrowed view for this homeowner. And so as you're planting trees, think about how you're framing views, because putting a tree that's going to grow in and be a large structural component of the landscape, the way that people see things is going to shift over time. Where I live right now is just autumnal tree city. Driving through these spaces is just kind of awe-inspiring because the fall color. But when you think about it, all of these trees that you're seeing as you're driving through these spaces, they're all part of individual landscapes, and individuals have made choices for a lot of these spaces. And they've put in these trees to create this kind of this canopy. So if I'm looking at a new space to think about what I'm going to add, one of the things I do is I look out past the space that I'm in and look for what's happening beyond that space. Because I really want to like anchor this garden within the context of the greater community that it's in. And so looking for colors and textures that you're seeing, and it's not that you need to mimic it, but I will kind of use the plants that are beyond the property lines of a space to help kind of use it as criteria for developing the garden. And so thinking about how I can incorporate those colors and textures into the garden helps give continuity to the space that would be missing if you just kind of disregarded what was happening outside of the garden that you're developing. So there's the idea of, will this plant fit my space? On the flip side of that is thinking about it. There are some core design principles that you can lean on when planting trees. Using trees as living art or architecture. There's line, the trunk of a tree, especially one that you don't always see the canopy of. Those upright, strong forms help kind of frame a space. The weeping trees create a sense of flow and movement in a space. Using a variety of textures with the plants that you plant, and then also thinking about specifically trees and the canopies of trees and how those interact can create a lot of like layered interest texturally. So having a Cyadopodus with its long, soft needles in front of a tree that has a wider leaf, that's going to create a lot of visual interest, not just below the eye line, but above. So thinking about how these kind of textures interact with each other, it'll create interest throughout the whole view. Looking at the shape of a tree, some of the words that we'll use is conical, weeping, or rounded. These will kind of inform what the shape of the tree is going to look like when it's all completely leafed out. Depending on where you place a tree, the shape of the tree, it might be either a visual stopping point for the eye, or if you put two conical trees, you flank it on either side of a driveway, it's almost like a funnel. Using the trees as kind of living architecture and sculpture in your garden is a great way to enhance it. Another thing I like to do is on the hillsides. The thing I think of is, in Tuscany, the images of the hills with the cypress trees that are growing straight up and they're just dotted through the landscape and the hills. That can be a great way to create a focal point, creating something that's upright. It's almost like an exclamation point of a tree. But then the other thing is on a hillside, using a weeping type tree, you can kind of accentuate the hillside and it gives the feeling of like flow or water down a hillside. It kind of accentuates the hillside rather than putting like a stopping point in that would be kind of an upright type tree shape. There's some trees like a weeping larch, for example. If you let it kind of trail and do its thing, it will work almost like a ground cover for the space and create a lot of low-lying interest. And so it's definitely a tree, but it's not taking up the upright space in a way that a different type of tree might take. Once you get through the have-tos, then you get to kind of start getting into the things that you get to. I'd like to have a plant of flowers. I'd like to have a tree that has fruit for the birds, or I'd like to have a tree that provides shade, or you get to start to think about all of the extras. What's the show it's going to provide during each season? Summer, spring, winter, fall. What's going to happen with this plant throughout the context of the whole season? And not everything is going to shift. There's lots of conifers. They pretty much look the same all year round, but it offers interest and texture in other ways. When I'm looking at trees, ideally, I'm going to hit a 4-season interest if I can. For example, this time of year, perotias are just like, they're brilliant. They have brilliant fall color. The leaves are interesting. And then they shed their leaves, and into the winter, you get beautiful bark. They just generally have an interesting shape to them. But it's really about the trunk and the bark that comes along with the perotias. So that's your winter interest. And then you move to the spring, and the perotias will get little red flowers. And then, of course, it's leafed out and green and it provides shade during the summer. When I'm thinking about choosing a tree, I'm trying to get as much interest in the garden as I can. For a smaller tree, I really like Cornus moss. I would say it's a 4-season interest, maybe 3, because it blooms so early. It's kind of on the crux of winter, early spring, but it gets yellow flowers really early. It provides early interest before really much else has started to kind of peak up. Then as it leaves out, the yellow blooms will start to develop these cherry fruits. And so you get the leaf texture, of course, and then you'll get the red berries. And then during fall, you'll get really great fall color. So it's not just one note. You have something to look at all seasons, and you get to enjoy these plants that can really anchor the space. The other thing that I think people don't always think about is the scent that a tree provides and what those feelings kind of conjure up. There's all the needle trees, all the conifers that kind of give a scent profile that we're generally pretty familiar with. One of the ones that's kind of been really shining right now in where I'm at is the catsuras. During the fall, as the color's turning, they also get this lovely scent of toasted marshmallow. So you're like walking through like a fall day through a space, and you get this like whiff of toasted marshmallow, and it's like you can usually look and you're like, oh, there's a catsura. I really like clerodendron peanut butter tree. If you rub the leaves of the tree, it'll give you the scent of peanut butter, and it's not offensive, but it does have this, I don't know, it's just kind of this really interesting scent to the plant that you really just don't get anywhere else. And then it also has cute small flowers, and it has interest there. So it has a lot of different types of interests. People put in all of these flowering plum trees, and then in the summer it just drops an obscene amount of plum all over the ground. And so the plums themselves are interesting, but it adds to the upkeep of the space. You're making a choice to add work to your life. And there's some plants I would do it for, and there's others that I wouldn't. Now, if I wanted to plant something that had fruit, largely for the birds during the winter, one of the things that has done well in some areas here is a crabapple. And you can get some with persistent fruit. And that just means that it holds onto the fruit instead of dropping it all over the ground. So the leaves will drop, the fruits will hold on, and you'll get these branching structures with these little ruby reddish gem looking fruits on the tree even after the tree has defoliated. You're hitting that like multi-season interest. You'll get a bloom in the spring, you'll get the leaf and canopy cover during the summer, and then you'll get the fruiting interest with the color in the winter. So you're getting multi-season interest, but it's not something that's going to add a ton to your maintenance budget. Taking the time to work through the if this, then this type, process of like, this plant is going to drop fruits. These fruits are, going to be virtually inedible, or I'm realistically not going to pick them up. But I do like the interest that it provides. Then looking at what else you can find in order to kind of hit that seasonal interest. I guess it's like, don't get discouraged. The first tree that you're looking at doesn't kind of meet all your requirements. because there's so many different trees out there. Taking the time to find the right one is a worthwhile endeavor. It's going to be something that you get to enjoy for a long time. In our area, fall for large trees is kind of considered digging season. So we'll have access to a new flush of trees that have just recently been dug and are coming into market. Nurseries that are local to your town, they're a great resource. They have access to that in a way that you wouldn't be able to get from just a big box store. I have a few different favorite nurseries that I look for different types of trees, but one of my favorites for edible trees and shrubs is Rain Tree Nursery. We love them. We love all the variety that they offer, and anybody's able to get bare root trees from them, and those usually ship in February to March. They have a lot of really interesting varieties, and it's a great way to get access to bare root plants. The bare root trees, what they usually are is a grafted root stock, and then grafted onto that is whatever tree that they're selling. And usually the grafting creates a smaller and dwarf size tree. If you want to get really nerdy and really kind of delve deep into just how many different options there are, Durr's Encyclopedia of Trees and Shrubs is a really valuable resource for developing an understanding of just how much there is out there and how many different options that you have. There's a couple different sites I use. One of the ones I like in the Pacific Northwest is OSU. They have a really well fleshed out plant search. You can look for different trees and learn about them before you put them in your garden. It's always beneficial to kind of check out your university extension to see how the plants are doing in your region, because they'll have a lot more information. And I would say also visit botanical gardens at all times of the year. And if they're open in the winter, go in the winter, because you get to see the structure of many different trees and how they look when they're not completely leafed out. And a tree might be really pleasing when it's fully covered and then just be less beautiful, shall we say, during the rest of the year. You can see examples of trees and plants that have been properly cared for and what the horticulturists have done. I love visiting gardens during the winter because that's when trees, they really do look like architecture, right? They are what's left of a garden. There's trees in all different shapes and sizes, and so it can kind of be overwhelming. But the reality of it is gardening's fun. It's not the end of the world, but taking down a tree is a really expensive endeavor, and having a tree in the wrong place is a really expensive problem. Making a good choice will cost you less money down the road, and it'll help you be able to enjoy your space. That's it for today's episode of the Relish Gardens podcast. If you love this conversation, make sure to subscribe. We've got new episodes every week. And if you know a gardening friend who'd love this, send it their way. Sharing the show helps grow our little garden-loving community. Until next time, I hope you find something in your garden to truly relish.